This is a daughter podcast where dads come to talk, think, and thrive with your hosts, Oscar and Blandon. Our mission is to cultivate a community of strong, mindful, and present fathers.
We want to curate honest conversations with all men, but especially those who have the honor of raising daughters.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Daughter Podcast. This is Oscar here with Blandon on the other side. How you doing, man?
Man, I am doing great today. You know, it's Sunday, so me and the family, we went to church, and then afterwards we grabbed some food, and we were just relaxing. And I was prepping for this interview that we have with one of my good, dear friends and favorite doctor, Dr. Brian Hebert.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here. It's been a long time coming. Blandon's been talking to me about a podcast for forever, although he's been on some of mine.
Well, it makes me more nervous because this is my first podcast experience. I didn't realize Blandon was podcast versed. So now I'm the one left behind there.
Me and Brian have been on a podcast together, and of course I was asked to do other podcasts, but no,
of course, yeah.
Me and Brian met 2017, 2018, Brian?
Yeah, somewhere around there.
Yeah. In Houston. Brian is currently now in Washington State. I do want to give a little intro to him so people know how amazing you are, because I'm always going to hype up my friends. First of all, Brian has his doctorate degree from Western Seminary in Intercultural Studies. He has his undergrad in Biblical Studies. He grew up in Scotland, which, you know, I am completely enamored with the UK and all of the geography and history. He was a missionary for a few years in the Middle East. He also ran a food blog of international food when he was in Houston. So he would go around and bother people in restaurants and taste their food and and then try to make me go eat it. A simple country boy from Old River, Texas. I was not about to go to all these places, but Brian made me go to a couple. He trapped me in a couple. So
I did.
That's good for him. He is a professor at HCU and Fuller Seminary. So he is highly decorated.
Yeah.
And as we like to say here, multi-hyphenate. But what we like to hear is that he has 5 kids. And out of those 5 kids, he has 3 girls. So he was daughtered first. So he has the most and longest experience being a girl dad. And what we also know is that him and his lovely wife, Christy, have been married for 21 years. So he must be doing something right. Or she just didn't want to break in a new dog. So, yeah.
Maybe a little bit of both.
Yeah. Wow.
So, yeah.
That's a heavy load.
Oh, yeah. That's kind of like putting whipped cream on an onion. You know, it's interesting. My time in the Middle East, when you have 3 girls there, they call you Abu Banat, father of daughters. And the tradition is when you go out with your friends to go drink tea at night, that's kind of what the guys do there. You never have to buy. Everyone buys for you because they expect that you have enough obligations. We'll say it that way.
I feel bad for you. I see what you're saying.
You know, upcoming. Yeah, they feel bad for you. I was trying to find the nice way to say it. I have my 19-year-old daughter listening in on the other earbud. I'm in her room, so I'm brave or stupid, as the case may be.
Now, what part of the Middle East were you doing mission?
I was in Egypt.
Okay. How long were you there?
A couple of years.
Wow. So I do a lot of international work within my field, separate from my actual career field that I have. But I find it so interesting, the change in culture, especially when it comes to daughters, is super interesting to me. I spent some time in the Middle East, not in Egypt, in Afghanistan. Obviously, that intercultural communication was a little bit different, and for different reasons. But we did have a few of our folks that were there in our camp that got into daughter talking, because at the time I had just had my first daughter. And so their take on daughters is way different and very, very interesting to what us Westerners have. So I'm very curious to kind of get a take on that at some point throughout the conversation.
Yeah, sure.
As you kind of discuss, being daughter.
Brian, before we kind of jump into the dynamics of you being a girl dad first, tell our viewers and listeners a little bit about yourself. Give them a little background of who you are.
I'm the worst person to give that. I feel like I can't say more than what you said at the beginning. Yeah, being a girl dad is kind of interesting. I feel like I'm actually really bad at it, to be honest. And so honestly, I see Blandon, like the stuff that he plans and puts together. I'm like, wow, how does he think to do that? It's so cool. And like, I kind of only know how to raise one kind of child. I raise honey badgers. And so like my girls know how to throw knives and shoot guns and go camping. And conversely, like my boys know how to cook. And like, I try not to like gender stereotype any of that kind of stuff. We just all kind of focus on everything. So I don't know that I'm necessarily like the quintessential example of what it means to be a girl dad, unless it's to erase the categories of like, baseball is for boys and Barbie is for girls kind of stuff, which I'm totally fine with erasing that line of distinction.
That's interesting. I am the same way as you. So my girls don't really like it, but outside is where we do things. But I'm not a planner like Blandon is, and I'm, again, like you, I'm just like, how and why? Like, it's just like all the things that Blandon does, and in the manner that he does them, I'm just beyond in awe, because it's just not my forte. A lot of our planning happens at my wife's level, and then I just follow orders. I've gotten pretty good at that, 17 years in the military. So I just wait for orders, and then I can execute. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. But no, it actually is fun, kind of raising daughters with that mentality. A lot of times, like, my stuff will go missing. Like, I might be missing a favorite knife, for instance, and I typically only have to look into one of my kids' rooms, normally one of my daughter's rooms, and I see it, in their shelf. Or missing books. Emily did a great job of cleaning up her shelves. And by that, what she did was she took all the books that she's borrowed from me, aka absconded with, and has finally returned them back into my stash of books. But what that means is, it's fun to kind of read similar books and be on similar wavelengths, ideologically. And yeah, so it's a fun interaction.
Well, Emily, come out and defend yourself. Say hi to everybody, and don't let your dad say that you've stolen all his books.
Well, I have stolen all of his books, and I have not returned all of them.
And I know you have. I know you.
There's still some scattered on my shelf.
Yeah, let's just have a quick survey.
Right.
Well, so I'm going to assume, is Emily the oldest?
Yeah, this is Emily. She's the oldest.
19 years. So I'm going to not do math and ask you when you were daughtered first, because if I start doing math, Blandon, will cut me out of the camera here.
19 years ago.
Thank you. That's great.
I'm not good at math either. Okay.
Was right.
Emily's great at math. Right. Emily, when was that? There we go.
I said it's not math. It's my birthday.
I am terrible at numbers. Like, I forget my own birthday. And I feel like the worst dad ever when I have to be the one to take the kids to the doctor, because the first question they ask is, what's their birthday? Absolutely. And I've actually learned to sort of preempt this. If I ever get a tattoo, that's what it's going to be. I'm just going to put all the birth dates right there. Because I just look like such a terrible dad. I'm like, I promise, I'm a good dad. I'm there for my kids. They love me. I love them. We have great fun together. But the doctor's visits, it's those are rough.
It could be worse at the airport, because that's what I do. Like, what's the kid's birthday? And then I'm like, I promise, she's mine. I swear. I'm not just.
It's not a trafficking situation.
Right.
Right.
And then, like, my middle, she's kind of shy, so they'll ask her, and then she's kind of frozen. I'm like, oh man, we're going to jail. Like, it's just like, this is not a good look.
They always do that at the airport, though. I was just traveling with mine, and by the way, I know all their birthdays, not to toot my own horn, but I know both of the birthdays. I remember everybody's birthday. So
have 5 kids and then come at me.
Yeah, right.
But they ask at the airport, who's this guy? Is this your dad? And both the kids are like, and I'm like,
stop stalling.
You're right. You look like me. Come on. These are my kids.
I just turn around and be like, you want them? You can take them if you want. You know. And then they're like, no, Dad. I'm like, there it is. Got it. You know. So
Yeah.
2004, you were daughtered. What was that like? Now, let me ask you this real quick. So where were you in your life around 2004 before your daughter got it? So what part of school were you in, or were you in the Middle East? What time frame is that?
So I was in college. I got married young, started having kids young. So when people hear like some of the things I've done in life, they assume I'm like 10 years older than I am. But no, we just got married young and kind of started having kids right away. I was halfway through college, and then we had Emily a year later. I always tell my students this of like, your last year in college is gonna be the worst year. Like, year one, you can get any class any time of day. You make your schedule work 5 different ways, but like your final year, it's those last few classes. And so you're gonna have like a Friday 5 a.m., a Tuesday and Thursday night class, a Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, middle of the day. Like you just can't make it work. And so that was kind of my life. I lost my job at the time, and was looking for a job and had just found a job the day that Emily was born. Pictures with her are me in a security guard uniform. I was working nights. And so I'm holding her. I spent the first, 12, 15 hours holding her. Christy had a C-section. And then I had to go to work. And from that point forward, then like all of the jobs that I had applied for kind of came through, and I figured out how to stagger them and make them all work. So I was driving for FedEx, security guard at night. I think for that last semester, I was staying awake about 30 hours, would come home and sleep for 6 or 8, go to class, and then repeat. It was a difficult several months during that exact time. But having a daughter, being a dad, like that was awesome. I love that part of it.
Of course. That's got to be super stressful though, because you don't have a job while your wife was pregnant, because you said you started your job when she was born.
Yeah.
Right. So now, I mean, I'm trying to put myself in that situation. I'm just like, I can imagine that stress of, I've got this child coming, my wife's going to need medical care. I mean, all the things, and you're just you're hoping to get a job.
Yeah, we lived in a tiny little town. The town was called Wake Forest. I applied to every single place in town that had jobs. I'd finally spot stuff here and there, but no, God provided would be the answer. But it was a lot of tough times, a lot of very creative engineering of things, a lot of tense moments, arguing your way through eviction notices, that kind of thing, until everything sort of leveled out. And I mean, a few months later, it leveled out and it was fine. But like the exact moment was kind of the eye of the storm, so to speak.
Yeah.
Now, did you know you were having a girl?
Yeah, we did.
You knew that?
A lot of people don't like to know. We've always liked to know. I like to pick out names. I felt like during the pregnancies, it always kept me a little bit more engaged. For my wife, I mean, she's living it out 24 hours a day. She feels everything, sees everything. But as a guy, you're a little bit less connected to the actual, goings on. But a name and all of that always helps me. And so
I know this, but our listeners and viewers don't know this. So you grew up homeschooled, right?
Yeah.
Back when homeschooling wasn't as commonplace as it is now.
It wasn't cool back then.
Did you choose to also homeschool your girls? What was the educational path that you took for them? You were a college professor and you taught for several years. What was your mindset toward education in your girls?
Yeah, so both my wife and I were homeschooled. I think my experience was more positive than hers was from an academic standpoint. Really like the flexibility that homeschooling gives in terms of curriculum choice. I'm a big fan of classical methodology, and my undergrad is a college classical methodology program, so to speak. So I really like that as a program. When we lived in Egypt, we didn't have money for the expat schools, which were like $30,000 a year. So missionaries don't make that kind of money. But when you work in like the oil field or something overseas, like they pay you well and pay for all your kids' stuff. And it's like a college education for one semester of first grade. Like, nope, can't do that. So we started homeschooling there. And then when we moved back to Texas, I think initially we were homeschooling, and then Christy found a charter school across the country. They're kind of Turkish background. And so kind of our passion is to stay connected cross-culturally as a family. And so we put the kids in that, and it's called the Harmony School. They're kind of, I think there's 30 something sites in Houston. And the one that we were at had about 114 languages spoken. They would always ask us if we would be the family international fair. They'd be like, hey, would you be the family for the America table? I'm like, well, there's lots of Americans here. And they're like, you're one of like 3 true American families. I'm like, my last name doesn't sound like it looks. It's like, that's because we're not actually American. Like my family were Cajun, we're French. We're like, we call the other white people in America the Americans. It was like, you see Jose over there? Like he's more American than I am. I don't know. And like, come on, man, would you just do it? I'm like, do you just mean like a white guy? And they're like, come on, would you just do it? Like all of that was just to say I'm actually busy that day anyway. I just had fun poking you around. So no, that school's a lot of fun. My kids were some of the only blonde-haired, blue-eyed kids out of like their whole grade levels and their whole schools, and just a handful of them. But fun experience. So yeah, we did homeschooling. We did charter school. We live up here in Washington. We actually have our kids in public school. Which is kind of an interesting new dynamic in terms of, who we're working with and trying to reach out to. A little different political scene in Texas. So just a lot of different options over there. I'm not like a die-in-the-wool homeschooler, though.
Okay. Is there a reason why you guys didn't continue to homeschool?
Probably was at the time that we went into the charter school, Harmony School, probably was kind of some ministry decisions of going, okay, how do we stay engaged in our community? That said, like I take an active role in my kids' education outside of the classroom. And so my job is to make them think. Right. And I would say that's actually the job of education in general, is not just to learn facts, it's to teach kids how to think. And one of the things I see in my college students, in my master's level students, I'm about to get to teach my first doctoral class. I would imagine I'm going to find it there as well. Is just the inability to think and to process and to analyze. And like that skill is lost art. So I mess with my kids just incessantly. Sometimes it's just in the form of fun. Sometimes it's making fun of them. Sometimes it's having fun with them. But I'm always harassing them on one level or another. But it makes them really sharp and really shrewd and able to think and quick on their feet. We do a lot of, like, as a family, hands-on stuff outside of classroom stuff entirely. I mean, so not just by virtue of growing up overseas, but just lifestyle choices we've made. Like I try to introduce my kids to foods from around the world, people from around the world, cultures from around the world. And like they're kind of the front runners in their friend groups at doing the same thing of like going out and getting connected and having these same kind of experiences. So for us, I think really it came down to a ministry decision. When we came back to Houston, we were also working with Muslim peoples. There's about 100 mosques there, about 250,000 Muslims. And so we were leading a couple of different teams doing different things. And it was just a way of kind of keeping in contact with that community in particular, but just, kind of this global bridge more in general.
I think one can make the argument at the current environment that I guess people do make the argument that schools are essentially just making workers, not thinkers.
Yeah.
Or the school system, if you will, making workers, not thinkers, or teaching them what to think rather than how to think, which I think is a huge factor. My wife and I thought about homeschooling. We just moved here. We've been here for about a year now. But with the constant movement in the military, we thought, hey, let's just go ahead and homeschool. But it was a daunting task, at least for us. So we went through public school. But to your point, I mean, we're in the South. We're in Louisiana, a little bit different than up northern, Washington or California or other places where there's certain agendas or what have you out there, right? But one thing that I've noticed a lot, and I was trying to think back, I think Blandon and I kind of started talking about this a little while ago. I don't think I was taught to really think at school either. Like, I mean, I'm trying to think back at my time, and in fact, I got really frustrated as I worked through a bachelor's degree many times because I need to go write a paper, but I can't put my own thoughts on the paper because they all have to be cited from someone else's thoughts in order to make the paper true. And it was super frustrating for me to say like, well, when do I get to like think on this paper? Because I have to write everything that someone else wrote. And so when I was working through that, luckily I was doing it online and as I'm, in the military. So my oldest would sit with me and we would talk about the way that we were writing. And I would use that to be like, well, this is my thought. And then she's like, well, why can't you write that? Like, well, because I'm not a cited professor or whatever somewhere. And I can't cite myself. So I have to find someone that has my viewpoint to put in here to do this thing. So that was a frustrating thing, but I used it with my oldest to hopefully, I hope, to help her kind of think through some of the things that I was learning.
Mm-hmm. I think with a lot of people, the question of schooling is, there's a fear side of it, but I'd say there's a proactive parenting side where, the fear side is, well, I don't want my kids to be washed out. And I know for how I was raised, when I make the joke about being very homeschooled, we were in a like very conservative church that everybody did the same programming. There were kind of levels of amplification that made that a little bit stronger probably than it would have been by itself. But part of the fear was, exposure to sinful people, sinful thoughts, sinful acts. And I mean, that's a real fear. We live in the state of Washington. We're outside Seattle. We're faced with this all the time. Right. On the other hand, we cannot walk away from what the scriptures say, which is not behavioralism. Behavioralism tells us that you are bad because your environment around you has corrupted you, and that is what has made you bad. And so it's your parents, it's your culture, it's your religion, it's all of these things. Like, that's why you feel guilt over this thing. This thing you've done is not actually bad by itself. It's just everything has told you it's bad. But Christians kind of get into that where they go, oh, if I can just keep every sinful influence away from my kids, then they'll be good. And that's kind of, it's not just homeschoolers that make that fallacy. I'm a 1-point hyper Calvinist, total depravity. Like, no one's teaching my kids how to be bad. They're just good at it. I mean, they learn from the best. I've realized, and this is one of the joys that I have, is I want to be part of the exposure cycle with my kids. That way I'm there to help them interpret what they're seeing. And to, like, for us, if like, we kind of grew up right on the edge of having internet versus not having internet. My family was a little bit of a front runner, but even having the internet when I had it, it wasn't the same access that it is today.
Oh, absolutely.
And so I was largely grounded in my faith before I was really introduced to grossly alternate worldviews. Whereas for my kids, it's happening in elementary school. And even if they weren't in school, like, it would be the neighbors. And like, there's nowhere you can run to now. If technology exists, like, it has flattened the world and everybody's drinking from the same cesspool. And the answer is not, we'll keep them away from technology, which is easy to do, right? It's like, if technology is the great leveler and that's the cesspool, keep them away from technology. But then when they get it and they're 18, 19, 20, now they've had zero time to try to learn how do we wisely make choices about what we're looking at, about what we're thinking. How do we evaluate what we're hearing? We had one of my favorite family discussions just happened a few weeks ago. Our elementary school does an end of the year, happens to be during Pride Month. I'll just throw that out there. Rainbow parade.
Okay.
Now, we debated probably for a full hour as a family. Every member of our family debated, what does this parade mean? Because I started the conversation with, I don't like what's happening here. Like, I don't think this is good. And, my youngest daughter was the fastest to roll her eyes, middle child. And she's the fastest to roll her eyes, go, come on, you're being, whatever. And I go, no. Like, let's look at the timing of it. Let's look at where we're at. Let's look at all of these things. Like, there's clearly an agenda. Now, it's not like there's something overt happened. There's nothing that you could actually tie it to and say, see, look, this is it. And so then you go, well, what's the parent's response? Like, Do we send them an angry email? Do we do this? Do we participate? Do we show up, not show up, just be sick that day? Like, there's all these kind of options. But listening to my kids, like, I just had this big grin, listening to them debate the nuances of what it all meant and how we can or can't participate based on what it all means, and just listening to them kind of reason it out in their head. I go, okay, actually, all of my worries are fine because y'all are thinking about this. And I think just for a lot of parents, it's kind of a lazy parenting style, where we kind of just assume the kid didn't see anything, and so we don't talk about it, right? You see two dudes walking down the street holding hands, and you're like, oh, my kid's too young. They didn't catch what that was. Yeah, no, sure they did. They saw it. They get it. And so for me, like, I love taking my kids on experiences into places. Like, we don't stay out of the bad neighborhoods. We didn't do this in Houston. We don't do this here. We see people selling drugs on the corner, or we see a prostitute on the corner. We talk about it. One of my favorite series that Emily and I just finished watching was going through Breaking Bad. It's like we watched this together, and we had some super deep theological, philosophical conversations. We probably talked for as many hours as we watched the show. And it's those kinds of things where, like, we have a front row seat together to looking at the world and thinking about the brokenness in the world and how should we think about this. Okay, that was a long answer to, like, what do I think of homeschooling? So y'all gotta rein me in here.
No, we enjoy the long answers. I like the story behind it. And one of the things that you did bring out is how parents, and specifically dads, are the primary educators. The education system, whatever you choose, public, private, charter, magnet, whatever, is supplemental. And we are the people who are truly educating them on how to think. That is what I appreciate from, like, these conversations, because I want my daughters, and we've said this before, I want my daughters to be critical thinkers. I don't want them to be spoon-fed information and then take it down. I want them to study and dissect it and question it so they can have an understanding. And I think that's when I began to have an understanding. I grew up in a time and age where the teachers that I had still were teaching us how to think and not what to think. And I think it began to change in high school, but by that time I had, firmly kind of grounded myself in the sort of academia that I loved, that I liked, and the books and the history and the reading. It wasn't going under this kind of, like, revisionist history as it is now. And everything is being deconstructed and broken down and taken apart. And so now it's not a real history anymore. But I say all that to say this, that I still want my girls to question it. I still want my girls to question, like, if somebody is saying deconstruct this, instead of just saying, oh yeah, we should just deconstruct. Let's tear down all the statues and do this, that, and the other. And it's like, why are you doing that? But why? Mm-hmm. Like, ask the question why, dig deeper into the conversation so you can understand its significance for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's it's not just education in view of a job or in view of going to college, which is not unimportant, but there is a kind of education of just kind of being wise and shrewd. And in the age of the internet, on the one hand, you want your kids to be able to use technology. And I see this maybe more with my boys. Are we allowed to talk about boys on the show? I see more with my boys because they're just technology junkies. And they're quick to debate with me, which I invite. This, like, let's talk about the issues, let's debate it back and forth. And they're quick to go, yeah, but I saw where somebody on the internet said you could do X, Y, Z, and I go, yeah, but it's the internet. How do you know? It's like that whole "how do you know what you know" question, which 50 years ago nobody ever had to have that talk. Where now you go, well, there's so much false information on the internet. Learning how to think through what might be an agenda. How do I verify and corroborate information that I find? Just simple, basic stuff like that. But just starting with that skeptical point of not just finding one thing that backs me up and then running with it, but being skeptical enough to go, okay, how do I sort of figure this out for my life? That's a learned skill. And some of my kids are naturally skeptical and good at that. Others are a little bit more believing. And so I've learned maybe I'm not as good a teacher in that as I thought I was, maybe my kids were just naturally skeptical. I don't know. So with my one that's not skeptical, I'm like, oh, maybe I haven't figured out how to teach this. Maybe I've simply, created some copies of me here.
And I think it's also about helping them understand how the game is played now. The game has changed. So if you go and research one thing, some computer out there reads what you research and then feeds you the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I've found that many people don't realize that they just start getting fed the same thing. So my daughter doesn't have social media, but I've showed her through Instagram, like, hey, look, you can see all these things that pop up on the search thing. All these things are because I've commented or liked or done something, and so now it just feeds me this. On our social media for the podcast, our community is fathers. So when you go to search anything, the first things that pop up is other accounts that have fathers. And so I show her that. I'm like, look, this is good for us because this is our community. This is what we're after.
Right.
But when you start searching for information specifically, this also works like this. This game is also played the same exact way. And so you look to find something on the left, and it'll just feed you all that. And you go look to find something on the right, and it'll just feed you all that. And it's hard for the algorithm to find the middle ground, even if you're trying. So one thing that I found difficult in a way is how do I make them understand how the game is played, and for them to really know that you have to be skeptical of almost everything you're getting, which without scaring them into being like, no one's telling you the truth ever.
Right.
And so there's a fine line there, but I find myself going towards that, like, just be skeptical of everything. And that's not an agreeable person, right? Like someone who's always skeptical, right? Brian comes over and says, hey, hi. And like, why didn't you say hi to me? Like, right? Like,
what do you want?
Person. And we know that agreeableness also helps in society and in your life. So I'm finding that to be a little bit difficult because I myself am trying to understand how that game is played. And so trying to relay that at the same time. And I tell my oldest, I'm like, I'm learning with you, like, especially right now with the, our podcast starting to grow and having some social media presence. I'm so far off on the curve on the learning side that I tell her I'm learning with you, but you still can't have it. Like, you can't have social media. Like, you can look at some of the things I show you, but that's where we stop. Sorry.
Yeah, man, it's so difficult because even if your kids don't have social media, their friends do. And so, like, with my younger kids, so all three of my daughters now have phones, but my two youngest do not. And they're like, come on, daddy, like, everybody's got a phone in my class. I was listening to the boys and they started saying something about Gaza, and my ears perked up. I go, what do you know about Gaza? And, oh, so-and-so is showing us this from Instagram. And, of course, it's just algorithm generated nonsense that they're being fed. And I said, well, let's talk about the issues. Yeah. And so, like, part of my specialty is like Middle Eastern studies. Right. Yes. So we just go through like an hour. Like, he's 12 years old. I'm sure he's like, oh my gosh, how can I just like pull a fire alarm and get out of this conversation?
Right.
But by the end of it, he's actually pretty engaging about those kind of things. But at the end of it, I go, so do you see how complex the issues are? But everybody wants to make these issues really, really simple. Very simple. I will say, and this relates to being a good dad and having deep relationships with your kids, is establishing a baseline of not, I know everything. Because I think some dads feel the pressure to, I can never say I'm wrong. I can never admit a mistake. If I say this and you say that, you're contradicting me. Like we like to flip the collar a lot, but not trying to go there, but just trying to establish that everybody out there in the world has an agenda for you. And there are so few relationships where you have that it is unconditional. And this is one of them. But like those lessons have to start early, I think. And again, not that you're trying to build that impression that you know everything or have all the answers, but just like when you hear me speak to you about your life, you can know I'm wanting nothing from you with this information. I can guarantee you everything else in their world has a reason to try to get their attention, right? You are either you are what you can consume or you are what you can produce. That is our culture. It's either production or consumption, and everything that flows through that, that's where the agenda is. I mean, even schools, I'll be honest, people go, oh, this school said this glowing thing about me, I'm going to go to this school. I go, the school's a business. Like, of course, they're going to tell you whatever it is, because you're going to pay them 40, 50, 60, like however much your school costs, you're going to pay them that much. Like, that's like a small house or a big car. Of course, they're going to tell you
a very
great.
small house, though, Brian.
Very small house now. Well, not even a closet up here.
You're right.
Very true. I mean, even the public school system, we put our kids in here, and sometimes I'm like, I'll say, hey, I'm gonna grab the girls because they got to go to a doctor's appointment or whatnot. Oh, well, they already had so many absences. I'm like, so are you telling me I can't grab my kid? Like, I can't go to the school and grab my kid? Like, because they're like, well, no, it's all the absences, but then we know that there's subsidiary money that comes in for the school for every person that's there, and well, wait a minute, there's still my kid. Like, if I have to go grab my kid out of school, we're doing this. But even within the parents, like my wife's like, well, I don't think we could do that. I'm like, what do you mean we can't do that? But I even myself, I'll catch myself doing that because we're starting to get that condition, right? Like, yes, schools are supposed to be for learning, but as you grow up and you start learning the game, you're like, well, sure, but really it's an area where I can drop my kid off for daycare, where they're supposed to be teaching them something and getting some socialization, but I can also go to work, right? Because we've done this thing, this back and forth thing, which is the school system. But the way they make it sound is now my kid is they own my kid from 8 a.m. to whatever 4 p.m. and I have to have special circumstances to go see my kid at school. Like, it's a weird thing to think about.
Yeah. My kids are just boss nerds, and they never want to leave. Like, I'm like, hey, let's ditch out and let's go bike riding, let's go camping or something. Like, oh, we have to be there for a test. Like, what are you talking about? You don't have to be there. They'll let you do it later.
Right.
I would have killed to have my dad bust me out of school early. So to me, I like getting back to homeschooling specifically, the choice that a lot of younger parents struggle with of, do I homeschool? Do I public school? Do I do this? Like, am I abdicating my rights? Am I like, if in any of these scenarios? No, thank you, Savannah. My second daughter just brought me. I think she's going to be listed here on the podcast. She just brought me some tea that she made.
Nice, that's a good
Thank
move.
you.
Hi, Savannah.
I'll pay you later, Savannah. Thank you. I think people get worried about, am I abdicating that responsibility? And I would say the approach that you should apply to everything in your life is engagement. Like, if you send your kids to a Christian school and you're unengaged, your kids are going to turn out and they're going to have the same abandonment daddy issues, especially your daughters. They're going to have those same issues as the kids who were dumped at public school, as the kids who were raised on the street, as the kids who, like, the answer is not what's the curriculum. The answer is how engaged are you? And, to relate this back to the arts, like, I introduced my kids to all kinds of movies that are great cinema, but from my more conservative homeschooling days, I probably wouldn't have watched at that age, etc. My wife's probably a little bit more conservative on that scale. But to me, the issue is not what are they watching. It is more, are we talking about what they're watching? Because if you go, well, I can't let them watch that because it has the wrong letter in front of it, or behind it rather. But I'll let them watch this little kids show. Man, turn on a kids show these days. If you're not talking about the kids shows that your kids are watching,
right.
Like, I sit there in the living room with my kids, and they're, gosh, what is Jack into right now? How to Train Your Dragon. They've turned this into like an 11 million part series, and it's the dumbest thing ever. So I just sit there and I bust on it and deconstruct it, and he hates it. But as he gets in like better movies with me, my hope is that he could be more like Emily and Savannah, that start learning like story matters and content matters and all these different elements, but with both sides, like the being present and talking it through with them is such a key thing.
Yeah, I completely agree with that point. And but I think there is something to be said about uh putting your kids in an environment where you also agree with the ideologies that are being taught there. So I'm taking up because my two kids are in a, classical education private school, and we're seeing the great benefits of that, right? We're seeing that they're coming home and they're excited about learning different languages and learning about the Bible and going to chapel and having a chapel buddy, all these things. It makes our faith exciting to them, being in that environment. I'm seeing how much the girls like it, and they like it for different reasons. Now, my youngest one, she is more into the academics part of it, and so she's like, "Daddy, this is what we learned in French class today," and then we're looking up all these French words, and but we were already down that path, right? I was already trying to teach her the alphabet and numbers in different languages, and my oldest is more of a social butterfly, right? So she likes the aspect of being in a school where it's kind of the age range, and she likes hanging out with the older girls and this, that, and the other. And I'm not saying, that this is just the better option. I'm saying for our family, it seems to be working. And I'm not saying that this is keeping them for anything, because some of those same students, as you said, they have social media, and
Right.
they have access and exposure to things that we're not allowing our girls to have exposure to and access to. So that's still the conversation. So it goes back to what you said about engagement. And I do like what you said, because me and Brian typically agree about cinema. That's how our friendship was even more solidified. But yeah, I let the girls watch things that probably their mom would not want them to watch right now.
Does she watch the podcast? Do we need to keep that stuff muted, or you want to talk about it?
I sent her that video specifically.
That's actually what I was smirking about a moment ago. Emily is hearing what I'm saying, and she's like texting from the peanut gallery. So she goes, quote, "Dads can never say they're wrong," end quote, but continues to argue in favor of Homeland. And then the second one is, quote, "Story matters," end quote, still defends Homeland. So she lit me up the other night on this program that she did not
she does not care for.
Didn't find compelling. Yeah, it's a great story. Great story.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, I want them to understand that even if you don't necessarily agree with the story, you can find beauty in the story, if that makes sense. Like, I don't necessarily agree with every storyline that I'm watching, but do I find some things about that story and that movie compelling?
Right.
I absolutely do. And so no, excellent points.
But I think, and please correct me here if I'm wrong, but I think we're talking about sheltering and then not sheltering, right? So you're absolutely right. Like, we had our girls in a Christian school when we were in our last assignment, and the thing that I found, and the thing that I've tried to do more and more, is to expose them to things, as Brian was saying, expose them to things so that we can have these conversations about the things that are out there. Because I know parents who just like, they'll never watch anything that has a cuss word in it. They'll never, like, anything outside of this little bubble is a no-go. And although that seems like safe and comforting, what happens in my eyes is my kid's going to go out to the world and then just be bombarded with things that they don't know how to handle. Right. And
or they're going to cook with mom in the kitchen. Either way.
True. But like, a perfect example is like curse words. For a long time with our first kid, like, my wife was like, "Nope, that we can't watch that. Nope." And I'm like, as I would get irritated. I'm like, it's not about the word, but a word is just a word until it's used in a certain manner, right? Or until it's put into context. A word is just, you can just read a word on the dictionary. It means nothing other than what it means. And so, although I don't, Blandon knows me, and I try to clean my mouth up as much as possible, because I'm a knucklehead. But around my family, I do my best not to use those words, specifically when I'm talking to my girls, because now I'm talking that word to them or what have you. Mm-hmm. But well, we would be out in public, and my daughter would be like, oh, "That person just said whatever, the F word." I'm like, "Yeah, it happens. Like people say it." You know? And then I'm like, "Did they say it to you?" Well, no. Did they say it to a person? Like to a person, towards a person? No. What did they say? Like, well, they said this. Like okay, well, it's gonna happen. Like this will not be the first time you hear it, and it will not be the last time you hear it. It's just is, right? And so again, that's a simple example, but it's just being able to have the conversation. Like, yes, you're exposed to these things out here. This has happened a lot now that we went from that Christian school now to the public school. And at first it'd come in and they'd be like, well, this happened with this kid, and this kid is a jerk. And I'm like, yeah, maybe this is the world we live in. Like you have a plethora of people with differences in every way, shape, or form, and you're gonna run into these things. Let's talk about them. What is it that's bothering you? Oh, what's the word? Okay, well, the word means nothing unless it's used in this manner. Oh, well, okay. And so having the conversation and not over sheltering, I think is really, in my eyes, is really important. And that's actually a point of contention between my wife and I sometimes, because she's like, well, they can't watch that. I'm like, why not? Like, this stuff happens outside of this house. These things happen. And sure, this is a fictional story, but it can serve a purpose. There's a story behind it. It's something that leads up to something else, decision making, and all these different things that they can watch and use, hopefully, as they move forward. And also not be completely surprised when they've never been exposed to anything like that, and then they go to their friend's house with social media or with YouTube, which we don't do YouTube freely around here. And all of a sudden they come back, they're like, I can't believe my friend is watching. Like, yeah, people do this, right? Like, we have to be able to talk about those things and not completely shelter the girls into this. And trust me, I'm with you. Like, into this real comforting bubble of like, well, we're good. We're good right here. You're 8. But there's this whole world that, whether we like it or not, they're going into.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I would say children are different, right? So what worked for my first and second daughter in terms of like their responsibility level, they're like, I never have to remind them to do homework. I mean, I was a terrible, I know I have doctor for my name. I was a terrible student all the way up to the end. Terrible student, still a terrible student. I mean, I know it's ironic, but it's a fact. Awful student. My kids, fantastic students. My oldest 2 daughters, Emily and Savannah, never have to remind them that kind of stuff. Sophie's just a different child. Honestly, she probably takes more after me in that regard. But the same thing is true of responsibility, of honesty, of trustworthiness, of like setting good self-setting good boundaries. And each child is different. And my kids all want to know, especially like my boys who don't have phones yet. Well, what age do I get a phone? Like, it's like this guaranteed birth right now of like, well, I don't know, like 21, 40, who knows? We'll find out. We'll find out. And a lot of it's based on, what path of trustworthiness and other kind of things are they going to take, So I will say, like, I don't want to give the impression that it's like one size fits all. And as you have multiple children, you realize like there's vast differences in how they interact with certain things. And for some, it's more like exposing them at the right time. And so that's probably more the conversation that's productive between my wife and I. It's like, is this the time for this? On the other hand, and this is my pushback to that, is like being naive is not the same as being holy. Being protected is not the same as being holy. And like sometimes it just leads you to like that sheltering sometimes just leads you to naivete. And the last thing we want for our daughters in today's world is being naive and exploitable.
Yeah.
Because there's 1,000 games that get run on them. And like the number of scenarios when I have so many conversations about phone security for them. I mean, it has nothing to do with like the pornographic side and all of that. It just has to do with like, using facial recognition instead of punching in your code in public where someone might swipe your phone and then start stealing like a fellow student. What do you do if a fellow student asks you for a picture of this or that? What do you do? I mean, all those kind of things. And my thing is, look, like you always need to know that like fear and isolation is a tactic that everybody uses, and you have got a hidden secret weapon, and that's me. Like, I'm not opposed to showing up at a kid's house.
Right.
Like if this ever happens, like I'm the first person you should talk to. It will be over before it started. So yeah, some of their friends don't talk to me, but whatever.
So Brian, I have a couple of more questions for you. I'm sure Oscar might have a couple of more for you, but this is my time to shine. I've been waiting to do this. I've been waiting to dig in and get all into your business. So
I'm about to hate these questions,
especially
huh?
about you being a dad. This is just great. Because for people who don't know Brian, he is not the most
Oh boy.
sharing people that there are. Him and Oscar are very closed-lipped, tight-lipped, private-lived people. So for them to be out here airing their business in the public is great for me. It's always amazing for me. So I get to do it with Oscar once a week, but Brian, this is a prime opportunity for me to do it with you.
Let's go, man. Let's go.
So we asked this of all the dads who have multiple children. You were talking about having multiple children and you have multiple daughters. So the question, most people want to know is, were you chasing the boy? Were you trying to get to the two boys that you have at the end? Or, were you just like, we just love having kids and we're just going to keep having kids until we feel like we're done?
Yeah. So I'm one of 7 and my dad's one of 8. And every generation going back from now till France they're all Catholic on that side of the family, has, very, very, very large families, to the degree that when I was engaged to Christy, I rolled out our family tree and, there's just like these massive generations. I'm like, so you want a big family, right? So we're probably just on that side. She's from a family of 5 kids. I mean, not quite as big, but still sizable. But we went from being a normal family to weirdos really quickly. And here's how it happened. So we had Emily and we had Savannah. Okay. That's a normal sized family for America. Then we have daughter number 3. We're right on the bubble, right? But people would out loud to us rationalize, oh, you were trying for a boy. So if they felt that 3 was past the number, that would be their response. You're trying for a boy. And then we had Ben. There's our boy. So like we're at least 1 past, and we're 1.5 to 2 past what is normal for them. But they would go, oh, and now you have your boy, with the implications of, and please stop. And then when we had Jack, they were looking for like, which group of foil hat wearing people do we associate you with? Are you Catholic? Are you Mormon? Are you Pentecostal? Did you join a cult? Yeah. So that kind of answers it if we were just having kids. And 5 is what happened.
But not chasing the boy though.
No.
Okay.
That's interesting. I can fully understand that timeline you're talking about, because we had our 3rd, and that was a big factor. Outside of my family, my parents and family, was, oh, were you hoping for the boy on the 3rd one specifically? And I'm like,
right.
No, I don't think I was. And then the next question is, oh, are you guys gonna go for the boy? Like, that's the next question. And I'm like, no.
Yeah.
The factory's closed here. Like, I again, I'm playing the odds here, and the odds are I'm gonna have another girl, and then we're 4 ends. So I completely see that timeline. And this is completely outside of, as I mentioned, my extended family, because that's a whole different conversation with our background and culture.
Well, I mean, culture does relate to like which gender is desirable versus problematic if they see it in terms of that. And I guess for me, on a personal level, it was never seen that way. I mean, I love my girls, love my boys. I love having a big family. I don't know. I mean, I come home and I have stuff to do, but I really would just rather play with the kids. And we're always playing like weird, funny games we make up. We have an indoor baseball game that we play with like a little foam ball and a tiny bat that's like comedically short, and it's the hardest game in the world because you can't hit anything. But like we're always just making stuff up like that, and it's a great time. But I think the attitude is like families should be small. Boys are preferable to girls, or if you have one, you at least need to balance it out and have the other.
Right.
I mean, I always hope to have both, but I would have never wanted one and not the other.
So, got another question for you. Emily is almost as old as you and Christy were when you got married. And so, me
I
and
can
Oscar,
feel her anxiety, just like, but like there's just this little sound she made over there.
So me and Oscar are nowhere close to you yet, but would you counsel her or say, if she found a young man, and would you say, hey, get married young? Would you say, wait a little bit, live a little more life? Like, what would your counsel be to your 19, almost 20-year-old daughter?
Yeah, so she was almost the age we got married. That is a true fact right there. I deal with this even without my own kids as a pastor who does premarital counseling and sometimes with younger people. I'm like, man, 21. I don't remember being this young when I was 21. In my head, I was so much older, and now I'm looking at it as an adult, as a parent. Like, wow. I mean, I think couples that get married young, couples that get married older, they have different challenges. It's neither right nor wrong. It's not good or bad. It's just you have different challenges. If you're older, you have much better communication skills and you're more patient, you're more mature as a person. You're also more set in your ways. You already know what you want to do on a Friday night. When you're younger, you're super flexible and super easygoing. On the other hand, you might not be as organized, might be more emotional about things. I think it all, for like my advice to my kids, would come down to per child.
Okay.
And I don't think like a one size fits all approach is the approach. I'm glad we got married young. I wouldn't change too many things about that. Maybe a few things about it, but not all of it. But I mean, especially and having kids young. I mean, we had Emily a year and a half after we were married. I don't regret that at all. I think people who get married and then wait, 5-10 years, I don't know what they're doing. I can't imagine people like, how do you have 5 kids? I'm like, well, I started when I was a kid, I had a lot more energy then. And now they're like kind of big and can sort of take care of themselves in large part. The people who are starting at my age and they're having baby number 1, I'm like, man, I don't know how. Well, they only got 1 kid, but I don't know how they do it. That sounds exhausting. So I'm a big proponent of have kids while you're young. But in terms of marriage, I think it's just, what is God leading you? Who's He put around you? Is it a rushed thing? I mean, you could be in your 30s and it could be a rushed thing with the wrong person. That'd be a bad thing.
I love the way you've squirmed around this question, though. That's what I've loved, and that you have not yet answered my question.
Sorry, what's the question?
You said, my question was your 19-year-old daughter, 20, not anybody else's, and I get it. You said per child, but your daughter comes to you, 20 years old, says, "Hey, Dad, I want to get married, and this is the guy I'm marrying." What do you say? Are you ready to let her go? You ready?
You wanted it to be super specific.
My question was super specific.
Yeah, no, it was. I know, but you're asking an ENTP, so like I theorize about everything.
Yeah, you do. You do.
So specifically, if she wanted to get married young, it was the right guy, good godly guy. Yeah, I'd be all for it.
Okay.
She's fun. I don't see that happening. Because she'd have to like talk to boys for that to be a thing. We had actually watched The Big Bang, which growing up as a homeschooler, a lot of the sort of nerdiness and awkwardness around girls that's in The Big Bang Theory is funny to us. And we had kind of watched that, and Emily got her first date for prom, and she kind of like, and we've not gone the I kissed dating goodbye route. We've not gone the what's the purity ring route.
Right.
We haven't done any of that. I mean, we've taught our kids what the Bible says, but it hasn't been like coerced a lot. And like she laid out like, here's what is not going to happen. And this was like, hey, do you want to go to prom? She's like, here's what's not going to happen. And I hear about this after. I'm like, hey, so sometimes like a first coffee is just a first coffee. It's okay for it to just be coffee before you lay down like the law. So anyway, like with Emily, I don't know. Like they don't need to be worried about me. They need to be worried about. I mean, did I show you the knife table over here with her various little. I'm not the one to fear in this relationship.
Well, I guess I could pass the hot seat on to Oscar because him and his wife got married very young.
We did.
They've also been married for, what is it, sir?
We just hit 21 years.
You just hit 21 years too. Look at you two.
Yeah, 21 years.
Both. So Ava comes to you, same age you and Megan get married, saying, "Hey, I want to get married." What are we saying?
She's got to wait till she's 30. That's the marital plan for my daughters. It's 30.
30.
No,
30.
They'll wait late. They'll wait more maybe. No, honestly, I mean, that would be extremely hypocritical for us to do that. And we actually, my daughter will ask questions and we'll talk about getting married very young. And a little bit towards what you were saying, Brian, we did wait. So we got married at 18, but we waited 8.5 years to have any children. And that was just because we felt like hey, we're really young. Like we're we're still trying to figure each other out. And then we had just we got married in 2003, and then I got into the military in 2007. And so just that massive move, I mean, you're looking at, I literally took her out of her environment and took her to this place that she didn't want to go to. And so it was just one of those things like, hey, we're just going to figure ourselves out, and we're going to go to this new place and figure ourselves out, and we'll talk about it then. And we talked about it every so often when we were at that 3-4 year mark. And then we're like, no, we're not really ready for that. And then, at 8.5 years is when my first daughter came into play. But we do talk to her about that in that context, is that we knew we were young. We talked to her about the struggles. Like we were working, 2-3 jobs each. Like we're trying to make ends meet and figure things out because we want to make it out on our own. And we're having an apartment and all these different things that, we're like, it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. And so we don't want to paint a gloomy picture for her, because obviously we're here and we're thankful. And as you mentioned, Brian, I truly believe that my wife is the person that God put for me on this earth. I hope she feels the same. I'm not sure, but for now, on my side, that's the way it is. I always tell her, I'm like, you're stuck with me. Like you're gonna have to pull chalks if you want to go, but this is it right here. So we do talk about that, and we don't paint a gloomy picture, but we do let her know the realities of doing that. And although I would not change a single thing to this day, every so often my wife's like, I think I would have waited a little longer before. So, but that may just be because me. I don't know how to answer that question, because I want to, in this learning process that is, my growing as a father of these girls, I want to be able to get to a point where, like Brian said, if it's the right man, if it's, if it's the way it's supposed to be, then who am I to be hypocritical at that process? But I will be super sensitive to that process. So I don't know how to answer that right now. I mean, my oldest is 12, and it's crazy because if you look at, I can't remember where I read it. When I was doing my studies, it talked about how I think it's either 12 to 14 or 11 to 14, something like that. It is the prime time for a girl to be able to bear children, do these things. It talks about this whole historical thing. And I'm like, that's insane. That's like, that's insane to me. But, I'm sure Brian could probably school us on this stuff too. You go to the Middle East, and it's a whole different environment. When
Indeed.
daughters and age and all these different things. So it's hard for me to wrap.
Not even just the Middle East, like even here in most states in North America, as late as 1980, you could marry a 15-year-old.
I did not know that. So my daughter's not getting married at 15. Let's just make sure we put that out.
But those are different times, like the ways that they were raised. Like, I mean, 100 years ago, a 15-year-old was like middle aged, just about.
Right. Yep.
That's very true. You got that to factor in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
when you put it in that perspective, yeah, for sure.
So Blandon, your turn for the hot seat. Your turn for the hot seat. You know, one of your daughters, I mean, she's going to be 18, 19, 20 at some point. What do you say?
He can't see that far ahead. He's told us several times. He's like, that's not happening. This is my bubble. This is where I stay.
I'm just playing with his emotions at this point.
Right. So now you're the guest co-host. Look at him now. He's like, you're in the hot seat. Answer the question.
It sounds like Brian fight fire with fire.
Yeah. No, and honestly, I've had this conversation. Listen, I'm open to them being married young because I do believe in growing with someone. You know, I got married a little later in life. I got married when I was 31, but me and my wife, we have a 8-year age difference. So she was 24 when we got married. I believe in getting married young, and growing together and building something together. I think that's what's missing. I think everybody wants to have their own things. Like they want to establish both their own houses and incomes and careers and things that are independent and separated from each other, and then come together and then try to make a life. But I've told Oscar this before, but and I think I've told you this too, Brian, before. I still love the love and affection that you both have for your wives and your wives have for you after all this time. Like even when I met Oscar, I was like you really love your wife and Megan really loves you. Like I saw that up front. And then just going out with Brian and Christy, I was like, man, there's so much affection here. There's so much love that's still here, even after being married to a guy like Brian for like 17 years. My goodness. So no, I would be in favor of them marrying young if it was the right guy. You know, if the mindset was that he was going to take care of my daughter in the way that she was accustomed to, yeah, I'd be all for
it. I mean, speaking as believers here, we have to look at what the Bible teaches about marriage and teaches about kids, and we value things in our culture that are not necessarily bad. It's not wrong to get an education. It's not wrong to be established in your career. There's nothing in Scripture that says, you shall be married at an early age. But I mean, in general, like the impression is, if God has designed you for singleness, go be single. If God has designed you for marriage, find your spouse, get married, have kids. And I think earlier in our nation's history, you would only pursue the career path, the establishment path, the let's sort of, develop ourselves first path, as a lifestyle choice. Whereas now with inflation, rent prices, food prices, I mean, with all of that, it's almost a necessity, where it was very hard. I mean, we lived very, very frugally, but we lived on a single income for most of our lives, or a double income where I just worked, 2 jobs. I mean, we were very cautious. We made a lot of sacrifices for that, but I don't know if a starting couple could even do that. I mean, unless one of them had like a really good job to start with. And so I think before you were making that as a kind of lifestyle choice. And so you go, oh, are you choosing sort of like the more biblical model, or maybe not model, but attitudes versus the sort of career first attitudes. Whereas now it's almost, it's almost forced on you. And I feel that tension, being raised a certain way, having lived a certain way. We have a much more traditional home. And now I feel I'm looking at my kids going, man, do I try to teach them? Like, what do I teach them here? It's a little bit of a crisis for my own self.
Yeah. No, and I was saying that because people use that as the means to which they need to get married. Like, I have to have a full career in order to get married, and it as if that is what's going to sustain the marriage, right? Having
Yeah, it
money
doesn't.
does not sustain a marriage. Having a house and cars and all of these possessions don't sustain a marriage, you know? So you can just as easily separate over those things as, you know, anyone else than a couple who, like you guys, who've been married, both married young, and you're still married. You're still married after 21 years, right? Somebody who waits until they're 30 and 40 and then they're divorced in, you know, the next 5 years, which are the statistics typically, because you're kind of set in their ways and they're not willing to bend and move, and while you're kind of growing up together and you have this history. And one of the movies I love is like this, it's called The History of Us, and it's with Michelle Pfeiffer and Bruce Willis, and they're kind of going through this couple crisis, right? And they're getting to a point where they think they want to separate and divorce, and they're not really sure. But then toward the end, Michelle Pfeiffer has this really poignant kind of like soliloquy where she's like, but you know, Rome was built on a day, and I don't want to build any other home on top of this home, and like how people build on top of ruins, and I don't want any other ruins on top of ours. This is our story. This is us. And no matter all the ups and downs we go through, I still want to be with you. This is our history, you know? And I find something very beautiful about that. And I would love to pass that on to my girls, the beauty of having a history with someone, the beauty of like going through these ups and downs and not having your whole life established before you. But instead building a history with someone until you look back. And then when you hit a rough spot, you can look back on that history. And that history said, we did have good times. It hasn't always been like this. And we can get back to the good times again, and even better times if we overcome this. So that's kind of what I meant by that.
We had the conversation a little bit during our anniversary dinner. It was the fact that she has been in over half of my life already. So over half of my life I've known with her in it, right? And it's a weird thing to say because you're like, because we did get married young. So you're looking at, you know, from 18 to now, she has been in my life. Well, even earlier than that, right? So it is something that I do value, is that we've done a lot of first together, moving out of the area, going to, places that we don't choose to go because of the nature of my job, but all those things are firsts, and all these things that we went through and had hard times, we had good times, we figured out good times, had hard times, like those things. It does bring, I think, a lot of value to our relationship, and I hope conversely brings value to my daughters, knowing that history that their mom and I have of working through those things. So there is a lot of merit to what you're saying, I think. Well, we're coming up on a bunch of time there, Brian. We want to try to give you some time back, get Blandon off your back a little bit, because trust me, I know after 17 years, I know. I see Blandon has got a book back there.
Yes.
And I know he wants to talk about it, so we're gonna give him a shot here.
Yeah, so this book is Daddy and Me and the Rhyme to Be. This is by Chris Bridges and Halcyon Person. So this is based on the Netflix series Karma's World, but this book is more specifically talking about a daddy and a daughter and how the dad gives the daughter confidence to do something she hasn't done. So she wants to write her own song in the book, and the dad has already written a song in the book, and how it just kind of demonstrates how he gives her confidence to do that. And so I really love this book because it teaches the valuable lesson that if we lead out before our children, and especially our girls, it gives them confidence to, as Oscar says, do hard things.
Awesome. Brian, I can't thank you enough for coming on here. I think you are way too humble. The wisdom that you brought over to us, to be able to think through some of these conversations that we're talking about as Blandon and I are going through raising our girls to hopefully the stage that your girls are at, is invaluable for us. I know that it's going to be invaluable for our listeners and our viewers out there. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for coming on, sharing your time with us. Thank you for your daughters for sharing you with us during this time. I know this is probably time you guys can be playing your weird baseball game that you talked about. So for me, thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for not allowing Blandon to persuade you away from this because he's asking you. So I really am thankful for this. Thank you very much. Blandon, you got anything else for us, man?
Yeah, I just want to tell Brian, thank you again for letting me harass him on air today. That's great.
Absolutely.
This is great. I thank you for coming on. Brian, tell the people how they can follow you or take a class from you. I don't know. Give them some of your social media things.
I'm not even like a really big like social media guru. Like I have my own Instagram. It's just Brian James Hebert, but you'd have to spell all that out. So nobody's gonna follow me. It's all good. My Instagram feed these days is just either smoked meat, woodworking, or mountain biking. It's mostly mountain biking.
Yeah.
Well, they won't have to spell it out. We'll put it on your image when they watch on YouTube. We'll put it on our notes. You might have some followers on there watching you for the smoke meat or the mountain biking. Maybe the knives. You get to see the knives, so maybe you put some pictures of the knives. I'm interested in those.
Yeah.
So we'll put that on there. But again, Brian, anything else that you want to leave us with as you grow as a father as well?
Just the encouragement to keep doing what you guys are doing. I mean, I've known Blandon pretty closely for a while now. You know, the fact that y'all are doing this together tells me a lot about you, Oscar. And so I just encourage you guys to keep doing what you're doing. I think you're helping keep an important focus on an area of life that isn't discussed. There's this hilarious comedian, Nate Bargatze, I think his name is. And he does this thing where like the school calls him and wants to know like something about his kid. He's like, I'm the dad. Like, I don't know which school you're calling from. I don't, you could have called anybody else and you called the dad. Like, and that's the joke. And so anyway, I just think you guys do a great job of not being that joke. In details areas, I definitely need to work harder on that.
I'm right there with you. Trust me. Well, Brian, thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely.
For everybody out there, thank you all for listening, for watching. Remember to send in your thoughts, comments, topics to conversations@daughterpodcast.com. You can also find us at www.daughterpodcast.com, where you'll find all of our social media presence as well as our YouTube and all the links that we have. For the book and for Brian's social media stuff, that will go onto the notes. Please look on there. And if this brings value to you, if you found this helpful and others that can use this information as well, please send that information out to them. Share our message with your people as well. We want to build a community of strong, present, and mindful fathers here at the Daughter Podcast. So with that, I'm Oscar with Brian today. Thank you so much. And Blandon on the other side. Thank you all. Till the next one.